Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining myself, Sophie Parrott, a journalist at HR Grapevine, today for an HR Grapevine and Sage webinar titled How to Choose an HR System in 2021, What HR, IT, Finance and Business Leaders Need to Know. The pandemic year has really shown the importance of good technology, and as such, it's possible that employers and people leaders will want to invest more in HR tech going forwards. This webinar will be shedding light on some of the signs when it's time to choose new tech or HR systems, and also the key requirements in choosing the right software, among other things. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Gronya Shaughnessy, who is Product Marketing, HR and Payroll at Sage. Throughout the duration of the webinar, please feel free to use the question function to put forward any questions to Gronya, and I'm sure she'll be happy and able to answer them at the end of the session. There will also be a couple of polls throughout the duration of the webinar, so please do feel free to get involved in those as well. But without any further ado, I'd like to hand over directly to Gronya to properly introduce herself.
Hi, thanks for having me, Sophie, and thanks for joining today's session, everyone. My name is Gronya and I work at Sage in the product team for HR and Payroll, as Sophie said. I've worked in SaaS technology for the past 10 years, and what I find really interesting is that the way we research and buy software, just like other consumer goods, has changed. And in this webinar today, we'll walk through some of the critical considerations when you're thinking about choosing a new HR system. So today's agenda, we'll take a look at the explosion of HR tech and spot the signs that mean you might need a new HR system. And we'll then run through the 4 key stakeholders that we've identified and talking about their priorities when looking at a HR system. And finally, we'll take a look at the next steps that you can take after this webinar to learn more. So let's kick off with the role of technology in the new world of work. So I think HR technology has never been more important than it is today. Companies realize that technology is a key to business survival. The sudden requirement for remote working has seen HR technology play a vital role to support how we operate as a business. And even before this, the average employee spend was about $483 per employee on HR technology. And our research, HR in the Moment, which was polling 1,500 HR leaders, C-suite execs and employees, revealed that about 75% of HR leaders say they've already using some sort of HR technology, but of those, 67% are planning to invest even more, just proving that we haven't seen the last of HR tech growth. And then 59% of C-suite and HR leaders also said that HR is even more focused on digital transformation as a result of the pandemic. So even though HR leaders are even more laser focused on that digital transformation than they were before, HR technology isn't just for HR leaders. The full offering of HR tech supports and significantly benefits multiple parts of the business: employees, managers, IT, finance, as well as the C-suite. But despite this, it doesn't always appear that leaders are really working together to choose the right HR technology. So before I dig into when is the right time to buy new HR software, I just wanted to ask you guys a poll. So over to Sophie.
Thanks, Gronya. So we're just going to do a quick poll really to find out kind of out of the below stakeholders who you believe is heavily involved in the purchasing of HR software. So a couple of different options for you guys to choose from, including business leader, IT leader, HR leader. So I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds really just to cast your votes, and then we can kind of talk through the results.
And just while, yeah, so interestingly, on the next slide, we did ask the exact same question in the research report, HR in the Moment, that I mentioned. So it'd be interesting to see if it's aligned.
Yeah, I suppose you can kind of draw comparisons from that as well. So I'm just going
Mhm.
to close that poll and just share the results. Well, interestingly, coming out on top was HR leader at 74%, and then at the other end of the scale, it was business leader with 3%. So I'm just kind of interested to see what your views are on that, and also to find out kind of how much that aligned with the research that you were talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so on this next slide, this is the answers that we got from the 1,500 HR leaders and C-suites that we polled and the comparison. So it's interesting that HR leader got the most, because that's exactly the same as the HR leaders that we polled. So, and that's hopefully really obvious that HR leaders should be involved in buying HR technology. Business leader, it's interesting to see that that was the lowest. So we didn't get quite the same results. But what I wanted to call out, and I think IT leader got quite low results as well. So typically we've seen that the IT persona does get involved, because we get IT questionnaires right at the end of a buying cycle. And these can sometimes like hold up our deals, or can hold up our HR leaders getting hold of technology software, because they want to do due diligence and make sure that everything's dotted and I'd before they signed the contracts. But it just proves that you need to make sure that you're getting all the key stakeholders involved early on, before you go into your purchasing decision, and just make sure that they're involved. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. So on this next slide, we just wanted to highlight what HR leaders are focused on in terms of digital transformation. We know that they have been for some time, and the pandemic has just accelerated that agenda. We know that both admin has increased with more digital employee experiences, but also strategic tasks have increased due to the pandemic, which is why it's been a catalyst for change for a lot of companies. So listed out on this slide here are some of the indicators that mean you might need to look at better tools to support your HR team, your employees, and your business succeed. So if does one or many of these stand out for you? Sadly, but not surprisingly, less than half of the people that we spoke to in that report said that they didn't have the right tools in place to support them cope with their HR admin, which meant that they didn't have the time to spend to be more strategic. So once you've identified a need, for example, things like you don't have visibility of your workforce, or your HR team is caught up in too much admin, which you could empower your employees to do via self-serve, or you're putting the business at risk potentially because you're not making policies or particular documents available at the right time, could be a sign, and are all very real problems that we hear on a daily basis. So with that in mind, who do you need to get involved to find and agree on the tools to support your HR strategy? Let's meet the 4 key buyers that we've identified. So HR, IT, finance, and CEO. All of them have different priorities and responsibilities in their roles, and therefore different needs from a HR system. While most of you on today's webinar are HR leaders, if you're working with and involving these other key stakeholders, it's important to know what they're looking for too. So we have a section for each of these leaders, which I'll run through in turn, starting with HR and people leaders. So HR leaders have had a really tough year, and a busy year, to say the least. So ultimately, though this past year has changed up HR's agenda, the pandemic has also sort of enabled HR leaders to become more influential. So with 57% of C-suite now seeing HR leaders as equal leadership partners, despite grappling with remote working and supporting employee well-being, which are really topical at the moment. However, as a result of this past year, 60% of HR leaders have experienced an increase in both their administrative and strategic tasks. So it means that to meet the demands of an uncertain future with increasing workloads, HR leaders will need to find newer and more agile ways of managing their people. And the right technology is really vital to enable them to do this. So what do HR and people leaders want from a HR system? So HR leaders want brilliant workforce experiences for their people. Maintaining engagement and productivity is a challenge right now, but HR tech can enable a great experience through self-service tools, strong two-way communication, and things like effective performance management and recognition are becoming those digital tools that are really important to businesses today to make sure that their employees are engaged. You also need to have that visibility of your workforce. So relying on spreadsheets or having multiple different systems means it could take you weeks to get an accurate view of your workforce. So you want to be able to achieve that complete workforce visibility at the touch of a button, really. And then technology that benefits everyone. So what I mean by that is the right HR solution should benefit everyone within your business. So as HR leaders, your solution should help you drive widespread adoption amongst your employees, something that delivers a similar user experience to the apps and technology your workers are used to using at home to engage on social platforms or to buy. And it should be user friendly, so both for employees and for your HR department to administer as well. It should be easy to use. And a technology that passes all the security requirements, so is a reliable investment and does check off all of those IT questions, is also really key. You also want to boost business resilience and flexibility. So finding more agile ways to work is key for companies wanting to survive, but not just survive, but also thrive in this new landscape of business. So your HR system should allow employees to work flexibly and remotely and stay digitally connected to the entire business, wherever they're logging in from. And then increasing workforce and HR productivity is, most businesses' big ask with investing in a system. So with a bigger remit and new priorities, HR technology should enable you to reduce HR admin time, but it should also enable you to gather that feedback and that insight to improve ways of working for the whole organisation. Okay. Back over to you, Sophie. We have another poll.
Perfect. I'm just going to launch the second poll. So this question is around what do HR and people leaders want most from an HR system? So as you can see, there are a couple of different options for you to choose from there. One of which is access to easy to use HR analytics for workforce visibility, a strong foundation to build business resilience and flexibility, and improved workforce and HR productivity, among others. So I can see a good third of you have voted so far. So I'll just keep the poll open for another couple of sort of 10 seconds or so, and then we can share the results. Before we launch the results, Gráinne, is there anything that you think may come out on top? Do you have an inkling?
Well, I always say this and then it's always the opposite, but the two main ones for me, I think, talking to HR leaders tends to be the employee experiences piece, especially with everyone working remotely and trying to get employees engaged without being in the office. And then just that visibility as well, like HR analytics is a real hot topic amongst our customers at the moment.
Okay, well, I'm just going to launch the results and see what we find.
Hopefully
So,
it's in that.
yeah. So coming out on top was workforce visibility and analytics around that. So I'm pretty sure that was one of the ones that you mentioned. That was in second position. And then technology that benefits all employees and stakeholders, that was the top at 29%. And then on the other end of the scale was strong foundation to build business resilience and flexibility. Do you have anything else that you want to add around those results, or?
So it's interesting that foundational piece got quite a low score, because it's something that we see as being quite topical at the moment, is that a lot of our customers and prospects that we speak to just couldn't pivot or transition very quickly to like moving to the remote working or engaging their employees digitally, because they just didn't have the right tools. So when we talk about that strong foundation to build business resilience and flexibility, it's just sort of having all of that data and all of those tools to be able to sort of change and pivot depending on what's coming down the line, if it's last minute or if you're planning for the future. Just being able to make those changes quickly, which I think is difficult to do if you haven't got a system to roll out those changes. So it's interesting to see that that one got a low score actually.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for casting your votes. I'm just gonna hide the poll and then back over to you, Grania.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to IT leaders. What do IT leaders want from a HR system? So IT leaders are also no strangers to transformation. In order to keep up with the pace of change, organizations expect IT to be at the helm and sort of, you know, those masters of the transformation, to be able to support the business of the future and keep it secure. And firstly, when looking at any prospective new technology, whether it's HR or something else, the first thing that they'll be considering is whether it supports the data protection and security needs of the business. So it's no surprise really that the first thing that they'll be looking for is a secure system to protect the business and its reputation. They don't want to be putting the business at risk. IT leaders will also be looking for systems that meet the organization's digital transformation needs. However, IT and HR are likely very aligned on what's needed from that digital perspective. So both the HR leader and IT leaders will want to drive innovation and also increase productivity across the business. IT leaders will also want to find a system that has easy integration with other core systems, as well as ensuring that it's easily accessible on any device. It will also need maximum uptime with dedicated support on hand, particularly if you're a multinational organization. It will likely be important for your HR and IT leader that you have that 24/7 support, so that if anything does go wrong, you know, your employees, your HR leaders, they have access to the system whenever they need it. And finally, for ease and simplicity, you'll want to find a system that does it all. So you have one HR platform from one vendor, ideally. If you do have other systems, these will need to be easily integrated to save your IT teams that time and energy. And it will just also create efficiencies across the business where possible. So I just wanted to share this slide briefly. The content for today's webinar is from a recently published ebook by Sage, and there's a checklist like this one against each stakeholder, which is available as part of the ebook. So this acts as a great requirements list, which is a good way to check off as you're researching your software options. So even better, it would be to sort of engage with your IT stakeholders on this list and get their buy-in, and the other stakeholders that I'm going to talk through in a second in a similar fashion. So by agreeing what that should be on this list will make a great way of kicking off this project together, getting their buy-in, building that sort of key stakeholder group, and taking that purchase decision forwards together. Okay, next up is finance leaders. So what do finance leaders want in a HR system? Particularly for finance leaders, we've seen that the pandemic has meant that they've had to shift from kind of that explainer of the past to more of that foreseer of the future. So they've had to pivot and adapt to their plans to meet the new challenges as a result of the pandemic. So whether that's staffing needs in terms of having to recruit more, or potentially having to let people go, or putting them on furlough, like having that real insight to understanding how they can keep cash flow as a business, or keep afloat as a business, has been essential. Organizations often struggle to make those quick and informed decisions in real time due to not having those insights. So this, as a result, impacts how they respond to change and flex to new priorities. And this is why cloud HR systems is so important. Investing in a cloud HR system with built-in analytics will help your finance leader spot things like attrition rates and other KPIs at a touch of a button, which helps make those decisions at critical times when they need to make them, but also predict almost what's coming in the future and model out what they can and can't do as a business in terms of the investment that they have or the resources that they have. Another key driver for investing in a modern HR system is the high level of automation it can deliver. So not only can you also increase the productivity of your workforce through intelligent automation and self-service, but you can improve collaboration across teams with better tools and visibility. So your headcount, your employees, is a huge overhead. So getting the most out of your people is a big green tick for finance. They always like to hear that. And one of the many roles of a HR professional is to ensure the company is compliant with employment, labour and tax rules. So with laws and regulations constantly changing, this is a never-ending challenge for organisation and a headache for a lot of us. A system that helps avoid things like fines or legal proceedings by standardizing and consolidating your HR and people data into a single instance will put your finance leaders' mind at rest. They don't want any unexpected expenses coming their way that they can't account for. And then finally, accessing the cost of a system. And what I mean by that is it's a vital part of your buying process is really gaining a true understanding of the total cost of ownership, particularly for your finance department. So there are other costs associated outside of things like the license fees or implementation fees. So you've got to think of things like support, training, and take careful consideration looking at what is covered in the systems that you're looking at and what could be an additional charge, so you have all of your bases covered when you're doing your research. Okay, so let's take a look at the CEO. So what do CEOs want in a HR system? Ultimately, as I've mentioned already, we all know that people are your biggest asset. So investing in the best people software out there will help your HR and people team deliver a people strategy that's aligned with your organization's business goals and build that competitive advantage in this area. So your chosen system should support flexible and remote working, which is critical at the moment, by helping to keep your employees connected, allowing them to self-serve and have real-time data available. So the system should have employees at its heart, really, with features such as branded workforce experience hubs or communication portals where they can get access to critical business information. They know where to go to find policies or handbooks. You also want to be able to have that continuous feedback loop with your employees. So something that is a business advantage is, a great place to work. You get your good scores on Glassdoor, things like that. So if you're listening and constantly having that feedback loop with your employees, then you can start to do things based on their feedback and show them that you're listening to them. Your biggest asset, what drives your business forwards, you're using their feedback to drive the business forwards, which is huge. And then recognition, sort of aligned with that, is how do you recognize your employees for doing a good job across the business? Getting people to feed into that, vote on recognition, and then sharing that back out with the business, making that visible is also another great tool, especially when we're not in the offices together and you can't just sort of turn to your colleague and say, oh, thanks for that, it was really helpful, great job, really appreciated your support. It's difficult when you can't do that so much anymore. So having colleague recognition is really important. And then the more simple, business as usual type activities, self-serve tools for employees to manage their own data, updating their personal details and logging their time and attendance and things like that. So CEOs around the world are really looking to revive and build a stronger and more resilient workforce that meets the demands of the future. A HR system should support CEOs to enable their organization to be resilient and adaptive by having access to its people data. I know I keep saying it, but it's so important, from being able to access it from any device at any time. It saves also your C-suite or your CEOs or anyone like that constantly asking you for access to data, which can take HR leaders a lot of time to prepare, like headcount reports and compensation reports and attrition rates. Whereas if it's all in a dashboard ready to go for CEOs to just log in and self-serve, it also saves them time and you time and that admin time again, just from that, just having that digital experience when it comes to analytics. It does mean that this approach, between HR and CEOs means that you can both spot trends before issues arise at any moment, and your technology should really enable your workforce to be agile as well as responding to shifting priorities faster. And then building a company culture and values will be a big priority for CEOs, and this can be supported by a HR system. So company culture is a bit like that secret sauce that defines the flavor of the business and builds loyalty and trust amongst your employees. And technology does play a vital part in that, and enables CEOs and HR leaders to send things like tailored communications, empowering self-serve amongst the workforce, gathering that employee feedback to help build better ways of working. But also things like those colleague recognition that I was talking about, you can tie those back to your company values as well, which is a really nice way of sort of showing your employees what your business is all about and getting them to work towards those company values as well. A big part is reward. Outside of recognition, compensation, bonuses, salary, things like that. So reward planning should be flexible in a way that recognizes and rewards your employees. And these should also be aligned to your company goals in terms of like performance. So you should be able to pull your performance metrics through to your reward planning. on an annual or quarterly basis, how often you do it, and contribute to that sense of belonging and culture and wanting to do well and working for a good employer. Okay, we have our third and final poll, so I'm just going to hand back over to Sophie.
Thanks, Gráinne. I'm just going to launch the final poll now. So this question is kind of around what is holding you and your organisation back from implementing a new HR system. So as you'll be able to see in just a moment, there are 5 different options. So the first is implementation time. We've also got budget, stakeholders buy-in, nothing, I'm ready to go, or whether it's something else. So I'm just going to give you guys a bit of time to cast your votes, and Gráinne, I am going to ask before we do collect the results, is there anything that you think might be coming out on top, or maybe something that you know that our listeners, viewers today might be leaning towards voting for?
In my experience, it always is budget, but to get that budget signed off, you do need that stakeholder buy-in. They need to understand, like, what's the benefits, what are we going to get out of it, why is it so important? So for me, those two are kind of intrinsically linked, but yeah, budget and stakeholder buy-in, I think.
Okay, perfect. Well, we'll have a look in a minute. I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds and then I'll close the poll, and then we'll see whether indeed stakeholders and budgets do come out on top. Okie dokie. So yes, on top with 30% was budget, and then actually, so stakeholders buy-in was 21%, so that was kind of in third position.
Okay.
But in second position with 24% was other, so that kind of suggests that there are other reasons that would potentially be holding people back from implementing a new system. Is that what you were expecting? Obviously, I know budget, you said that you had an inkling that that might come out on top kind of from past experience. What about kind of like the other option being in second position?
Yeah, I wonder what that is. Sometimes maybe it's like having the internal resource to actually even invest the time to finding a system and setting it up. So that could potentially be some of the other. It'd be interesting to know what those other reasons are.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, thank you.
Thank
you everyone for casting your votes, and I'm just going to close that poll now and hand back over to you, Gráinne.
Okay, so we are straight on to next steps. As I mentioned before, there is an ebook which goes into a lot more detail around this topic, which is available as a handout in GoToWebinar at the moment, I believe. You can click on that and download it. So for each stakeholder, as I said, there's a really handy checklist to walk through with them and build your system and project requirements out together, helping you to get that buy-in early on. And, you know, budget was a big thing for people just in that previous poll. So making sure that your finance department and leader is on board early on is going to help you secure that budget. And they can help you look at, you know, return on investment and total cost of ownership and build out almost that business case together. So you've already working towards the same goal, which I think is super important. And it's the same with IT, as I mentioned earlier on. Like, if you get them to help build that requirements list out with you, you can almost check it off as you go along to make sure that the systems that you're looking at do meet those requirements, and you're doing your due diligence to save, you know, you get to the end of your buying decision, you found the right tool, you really want to go for it, but it might not actually meet some of the security requirements that you need as an organization to move forwards with that decision. So I think getting that stakeholder buy-in early on, using those checklists, will really help to create that working group. It will be easier to get everyone on board, get things like budget signed off, get things like requirements signed off, and, you know, it will just make everyone's life easier, make your life easier, and it's just a handy thing to check back to at the end of a project as well. These were our requirements. We found the right solution, we're implementing it. Like, is it is that implementation going to serve all of those requirements as well? So it's a really useful tool to use as you move throughout your HR project. And as I said, this group will serve as your vendor and software selection committee almost for the investment, and help with that final buying decision, input and implementation steering committee as you go through that project. Okay, so that's it from me. Thank you for listening today. I've left quite a bit of time for questions. So I'm going to hand back over to you, Sophie, for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Gráinne, and thank you to everyone who has sent in questions so far. Please continue to send in your questions, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. So the first one that we've had come through, Gráinne, for yourself is, what would you say your top tips would be for choosing the right software? Perhaps maybe if you have like a top 3 or something, that would be kind of useful to share.
Yeah, so I think it's easy to get lost in the bells and whistles of a lot of systems. You really need to focus on your must-have. So I keep saying it, I'm going to keep coming back to that requirements list. So you want to make sure that you've worked out what those must-haves are with those key stakeholders within your business, whether that is the CEO, finance leaders, IT. You need to choose that group of people. You need to really nail that requirements list together and focus on the must-haves. And it is a nice way of looking at it if you have like your must-haves and then nice to haves as well, because that can be the tipping point of decisions. If you've got 3 really strong contenders in the mix, maybe they all meet your must-haves, but one of them's got those bells and whistles. So, you know, it's just a good way of being able to refine your research list and make the right decision. But they really should be your priority, the must-haves. What would be my next? I think it's also nice to look at how the customer experience, as in the support that you're going to get. So do they have things like a chatbot in the app which you can ask questions? So all your users have access to someone to ask questions at any time. I think that's something that's becoming a lot more prevalent in software and is a great tool to make that user experience much easier, outside of like, you know, having to raise tickets and contacting the support team. So thinking like, coming back to that digital experience, are there easy access to information and support, I think is quite key. And then I think my other top tip is getting your key stakeholders involved early on and building out that requirements list together, because then they'll also know that you've got it in hand and they're confident in you taking that project forwards. And you should absolutely be the main stakeholder in that, but you shouldn't lose sight that, you know, I know a lot of you answered that the software should be beneficial to everyone across the business, the employees, the stakeholders. It should be easy to use for HR as well, but you really do want to get that buy-in early. So that'd be my 3.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing those 3 tips with us. The next question is, what level of customer service would you say that people need when buying HR software? I know you kind of touched a little bit on in the answer before about kind of like customer service and those sorts of things. So yeah, what would be your response in terms of that?
I think it also depends on your in-house sort of capabilities as a HR team. So another key topic for HR leaders at the moment is like skills sets that they've got within their teams. Do you have someone that's quite good at looking at analytics? Do you have someone who's quite techie, who would be, you know, really good at administering your HR systems, as in like a lot of these tools you can set up, like I mentioned, your company culture, you can set up different performance ways of doing performance reviews, you can set up different feedback loops and cycles and business communications, whether that's to the whole business or just to a set of employees depending on the region that they're in, or the team that they're in, or the capabilities that they have. And so I think it very much depends on the skill set that you have within your HR team. For example, a company with an internal IT or system administrator probably won't need as much support in terms of implementing a new system, and potentially even operating that HR software, as a company whose HR manager is also trying to juggle the system admin, the IT responsibilities. So I think it's really important question to ask when speaking to the vendors that you're looking at. How much time investment is there in setting up the system, supporting the system? So as I mentioned before, like, is it 24/7 support? Do you raise a ticket? Do they have in-app chat support? How easy is it to actually administer the system? As in, I want to be able to set up a new policy. We're launching in a new country. I need to set up new absence rules or different absent leave days. That flexibility of the system and how quickly you can move with it, but also how intuitive it is. Like, is it easy to set up in a few steps, or do I have to do more stuff in the back end of the system? So I think make that either a requirement on your list, or have it as like a question to ask as part of the demos or the intro calls that you have with your vendors.
Perfect, thank you. The next question is, at what point in the process should we start to include IT into conversations when choosing the right software?
I think because I'm part of the product team, I do tend to get pulled into like security and compliance conversations quite a lot. And they tend, typically, not all the time, but typically IT get called in right at the end. So the HR team have made a decision. They know they want to go with a particular vendor, and then IT get called in right at the last minute, and there's lots of questions that can just cause a lot of headaches, not only for the HR team internally, but also for the vendor that you're speaking to, because it feels like they should have been ironed out much sooner. Which is why I think IT should be involved early on in that requirements building stage. So, and it's also good for you to know what they need out of a system. So you're not wasting your time looking at vendors that might not be the right choice because they don't meet those requirements. You know, GDPR is huge, making sure that you can meet GDPR requirements, making sure that the data protection of your employees is like number one. So if it doesn't do that initially, then there's no point really going any further with them and wasting your time and their time. So I think they should be involved in that requirements building, and potentially even involved in either one of the initial calls, but certainly more towards the end, getting them a demo or sharing them on like any security information sheets or data sheets or frequently asked questions, things like that, just so it also doesn't hit their desk last minute when they might not have provisioned some time to support you with this. It's also just giving them that project visibility of what's coming and when as well, just to make it as a smooth experience for everyone as possible.
Okay, thank you. And this is probably the last question that we've got time for, I'm afraid, but it's essentially, what is an average implementation time for a new system following the decision on the system, if you've maybe got like a rough sort of estimation of that implementation time?
This is a very good question. It really depends like on a few different things. So it depends on the size of your organization. It depends on like the complexity of your organization. So if you operate in one country, or multiple countries, or you're one entity, or you have multiple brands within a system. So it really depends how you need to like segment and set up your employees, can make a difference. But typically with SaaS software, so software as a service that's based in the cloud, you can tend to get up and running, as a little as 12 weeks, and sometimes even less than that, because they're so intuitive. So, and it also depends what you want to launch with. So if you're launching a new system, you might want to do it in phases. So get all your employee data in there, get like the core HR activities sorted so people can book leave, they can access key information. You get that up and running first, and then you're not going to have a performance cycle till the end of the next quarter, and then you've got a couple of months to build that in. So it depends what you want. If you want everything ready all in one go to go live, then it might take a little bit longer. But if you're happy to do it in phases, which I think a lot of people do these days, because it's just having the resources and the time and the bandwidth to do everything all at once can be quite time consuming for your HR teams internally. So it's not always the best route to go down. But as I said, it definitely depends on the complexity of your business and the size of your business. But if you're 100-man business operating in one country, I think you could be up in a matter of weeks. The complexity comes in with the multiple entities and the multiple country setup.
Okay, well, thank you, Gráinne, for answering all of those questions, and thank you everyone for sending in all of your questions today. But unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. But I just wanted to flag as well, I know Gráinne's touched on this a couple of times, but the ebook, How to Choose an HR System in 2021, the Ultimate Guide, is available in the handout section of the webinar bar. So you can access it on the control panel. So feel free to go and download it. I just would like to thank everyone for listening in, and a special thank you to Gráinne at Sage. We'll be sending out a recording of the webinar in due course, and if you'd like any further information, then please endeavour to get in contact with Sage directly. But I wanted to wish you all a great afternoon. Hope you all stay safe, and we do look forward to welcoming you back to additional webinars in future. Thank you everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Sophie. Cheers.